Hi folks, Buckley here. We're going to practice isometric sketching. Isometric sketching is a particular kind of 3D view of an object, and there's some rules to follow. But first, let me talk a little bit about a really helpful tool for doing isometric sketching. I'm not so fond of graph paper, with the exception of isometric sketch paper. Isometric sketch paper is really helpful for doing isometric sketching. So let me give you a brief orientation to this particular paper. This paper has a quarter-inch grid. So each line here, whether it's vertical, horizontal, or it's tilting up, each of these are a quarter-inch. And then the other thing to notice is that the lines are oriented in a particular way. They facilitate drawing in isometric. The word iso in isometric, iso means equal, and it refers to the planes on which you are sketching. So each of these planes is 120 degrees from the other, right? So that's where we get the term iso and isometric. So this grid paper is particularly helpful. You can print off a bunch of it. There's some other ones online, but this is quarter-inch isometric grid paper. I want to start with a little warm-up exercise before we get into sketching actual objects that I'll hold up and show you. But the exercise I want to do just gives a sense of how cube shapes, so shapes made out of straight lines, and also rounded shapes show up in isometric view. So the first thing I'd like you to do is sketch a rectangular block, that is 1 inch wide by 2 inches tall by 1 inch deep. Okay, so please go ahead and do your best to sketch that on isometric paper. You can pause me right now if you think you know how to tackle it. Otherwise, you can kind of follow along with me right now. Okay, so first thing is 1 inch wide. So width usually refers to the view in the front face. So if I were looking at something dead on front face, right, and I'm not drawing an isometric here, I'm just sketching, this would be the width, this would be the height, and then this would be the depth going back, right? So in isometric, this front face is going to be oriented up and to the left. Okay, so we're going to wind up actually sketching on this plane here when we do our width here and our height. So width, I've got 1 inch, so 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that would be 1 inch going across, and then my height is 2 inches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, that's 1 inch. 5, 6, 7, 8, that's 2 inches. So that would be my height. Okay, and what I'm going to do here is just follow the lines. So this line is going to go back into this direction. All right, so that gives me the front face. So this is the front of that cube, right? Now I'm going to go back. So I'm 1 inch deep. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 deep. 1, 2, 3, 4. Or I could trace this back. That's my depth. And coming down to complete this. There we go. Okay. So what's helpful with isometric is a little bit of shading, just to give you some contrast between the faces. Otherwise, it turns into one of those MC Escher drawings where you could flip it inside or outside, especially when you're drawing things like puzzle cubes. So one thing that I do is sometimes I'll go in and I'll shade. Usually, if you do a contrast on 2 out of the 3 surfaces, you get a pretty good looking object. All right, so that's our rectangular block. Now let's see how circular objects show up in isometric. What I'd like you to do now is I want you to sketch a cylinder, and let me give you the dimensions of the cylinder. So I want you to do a cylinder. I want its front face to be the circle, and then I want it to extend back in depth, okay? So it's going to be a 1 inch diameter circle, and it'll be 2 inches deep. All right, you can pause me here if you want to give it a shot on your own, or you can just continue to watch here. All right, so for our cylinder, first thing we're going to do is we're going to sketch a square on the front face that is going to be 1 inch square. So let me just kind of pick an area to do this. Let me start here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm picking out the 1, 2, 3, actually up 1, 4. Okay, so here's my square. And I'm actually going to go ahead and extend that back to full inches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 2, 4, 6, 8. I find myself having to count a few times when I'm sketching isometric, even using the graph paper. The lines all start to kind of blur together at some point. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on the profile. So circles in isometric wind up being ovals. And that's important. That's one reason why we practice sketching ovals earlier, and they're skewed in a particular way. So if you think about how this circle is going to behave, or what it's going to look like on isometric, it's going to be tangent in these places. So every place here, it's going to be tangent. So it actually winds up being a circle kind of stretched like so. So the long axis of the circle of the oval would be in this direction, and the short axis would be in this direction. All right. Now the boundary, guys, this is very important. So you notice that since this is 1 inch in diameter, the boundary of the cylinder isn't actually going to be off of these corners here. It's going to come off of the tangent. So you're going to have to sketch a line. And then actually, let me draw, before I even do that, let me sketch where the face of the oval would be on the back surface. That would help. Okay, so I'm coming in like so. I'm going to erase all my construction lines when I'm done. But basically, I've got something that looks like this. And on this surface, I've got something that's going to come down like this. Okay, so I am going to go over this in marker just to make sure I got my lines all tidied. And then I'll erase my construction lines. Remember that some of these are going to be interior edges, so I'm just being careful to trace only the outside boundary. This edge is not going to, this is not going to show up as an edge, right? This is a rounded surface here. I just drew the rectangle and turned it into a 3D object just to give me a sense of how big this was going to be. Okay, I'm going to go through and erase. It's a pretty good looking cylinder there. All right, and then I'm going to add a little bit of shading just to help convey that this is a curved surface. Curved lines help with that. All right, just one side note here. So typically, you know, the way we've been taught sort of since kindergarten to draw cylinders is to draw the face dead on and to then come back at some angle. You pick the angle, right? But we tend to draw cylinders like this. This is actually an orthographic, no, orthogonal, sorry. Orthometric. Orthometric? All right, come on, Buckley. So this is a 90-degree projection. Basically, this face here sits at 90. X and Y in this face are at 90. Here, X and Y are still at 120 degrees from each other. Okay, so when we're doing drafting type 3D sketches, just remember, circles are not going to show up as oval, or circles don't show up as circles in isometric. They're going to show up as ovals because of that, because of the fact that your X and Y are going to be at 60 degrees from each other, or filling out a 120-degree plane. Okay, so next up, let's start doing some actual objects, okay? We're going to start with a simpler puzzle cube shape. I know I've done some puzzle cube sketching before, so apologies for some redundancy here. But let's start with the L, okay? So we're going to do an isometric of the L. One thing I want to make sure I clarify for you guys is if I'm doing an isometric sketch of this L, and this was the front view that I have chosen for my orthographic projection, my 2D views, I need to make sure that the L is oriented with its front face in the appropriate direction, right? So the appropriate orientation should look something like this. If this were the front face I chose, this is going to be the front face view in the isometric. Okay, so I see a lot of folks where this may be the front face or what you choose as the front view on the orthographic projection, but you're doing something like this for your view. This actually assumes that this guy here is the front face. Okay, so when we're doing an isometric, always, always, always remember that your view finder kind of looks like this. So this is the front, this is the top, and this is the right side. Okay, so make sure you keep those consistent. So if you had that wrong on your puzzle cubes, if you kind of worked ahead and we're doing some isometric sketching, make sure you go back and fix that because we'll be looking for the correct front view on your isometric sketch. Okay, all that aside, let's work on the puzzle cube. So the puzzle cubes are 1/2 inch blocks, right? So I've got 3 blocks stacked together here, so that's going to give me 1.5 inches. I've got 1 inch across, and I've got 1/2 inch deep. Like I mentioned, I'm going to choose this as my front view. So the first thing that I'm going to do is start to sketch out what this would look like, maybe the total volume. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I'm going to come over 2. So this is kind of the front face that I'm starting with my L. Okay, and this L is going to come in, right? So what I like to do when I'm sketching sometimes in isometric is I may kind of fill out some shapes or fill in some lines, do more construction lines than anticipated. Okay, so come forward like this, and there's my puzzle cube shape. All right, so as I mentioned before, shading does really help. So I'm going to do a couple things here. First is with the puzzle cubes, if you want to get fancy, you don't have to, but if you want to get fancy, you can add a little bit of color. So I do have some colored pencils I'm going to pull in. But first thing I'm going to do is just make sure that my sketch is nice and tidy. Erase all my construction lines. Maybe I'll add in some shading. Let's see. I'll do shading like this. So if you're going to shade a particular angle or surface, make sure you shade all surfaces that are in that orientation. Okay. So I might do a lighter crosshatch here. Might have been too much shading. I'll actually do it. And come through with some color. Again, totally optional. If you bought colored pencils for this, cool. We do have colored pencils in the studio too if you want. Not required. All right, and that's it. So one thing you can do, guys, is you can sketch your isometrics for your puzzle cube pieces on isometric paper, isometric graph paper. Cut it out with a pair of scissors and tape it into your notebook as in the right-hand corner of your orthographic projection. That's totally legit. All right. right, let's try another puzzle cube piece. This one is a little trickier. And again, sorry if there's some redundancy here in pieces, but yeah, I've also done some puzzle cube orthographic projections and I think some isometric sketching, but more practice is always better. So if you'd like, go ahead and start sketching this puzzle cube as an isometric. This would be the front view that we're gonna work on. Okay, so I'll give you the front view on that one. If you want, you can pause me here, right? So this is what the puzzle cube looks like. Pause me here to work on that sketch on your own, and then we'll work on it together. All right, so I'm going to leave the puzzle cube up there. This is going to be the front view, so I expect my isometric to look something like this when it's done. Okay, so I'm going to start working on that front face, which is this guy right here. And that, again, is going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's going to go this way, right? So the front face is always kind of pointing this way on an isometric. Very important. One of the more common mistakes when people start sketching isometrics is to get the front view wrong. All right, so basically what we have here in the front is going to be a little notch cut out and then one added on below. So I'm going to work on the cutout first. And the way that I do isometrics is I tend to do a lot of sketch lines and then wind up deleting them later, which is totally fine. So everybody's got their own way of doing this. There's no one right way. Okay, so this is everything with the exception of this block to add on. So I'm going to go ahead and add that block on. So that block would be sitting right here and it's going to jut out 1, right? So it's going to jut out kind of like this. And it's actually going to wind up overlapping at the front, and we're going to need to erase a couple lines to make that clear. So these lines are going to go away. And this stuff's going to go away. I'm going to be left, put back on there for you guys, with this kind of setup. And this is an example of where you definitely need some shading here so this doesn't turn into an MC Escher kind of situation. All right, so we're going to put some shading in there to help with this so that you can actually see where what's poking out in what direction. All right, so first, before I do the shading, let me go ahead and go over all those lines. Come through and erase. Now I'm going to add some shading to help clear things up a little bit. So I think I'm going to do a hash here. Okay. As I mentioned before, anytime you're hashing, make sure you hash all surfaces that are in that direction, right, or in that plane. So I'm going to hash that one, and then I think I'm also going to do some hash marks on this guy on the top surfaces. Actually, they make those kind of checked. And again, if you want, we can go ahead and make it yellow, not required. If you want the sketches to match, it just makes it a little bit easier to identify which piece is which. Note that if you do add color to your drawings or shading to your drawings, you're doing that only on the 3D view. That's a convention. Okay, we do not add shading or color or surface finish when we get into SolidWorks. You have all those options. We do not add that onto our orthographic projections because the orthographic projections are going to be annotated with dimensions. So that's the only thing that stays on there. Okay, so hashing the hash marks, shading, and color or surface finish that's only on your 3D view. Okay, another one. Let's do another one. Let's do something with some circular features. All right. So how about we tackle the washer? So the washer, just for scale, let me find my quarter. Take your best guess as to exactly how big that is. We're not going to fault you if you're a little bit off. This hole is about dime size, and then this guy is probably about 2/4 is what I'm going to say. All right, obviously the way that we had done an orthographic projection on this was the front view, right? And this was the top, and this was the right side. So the way that it would be oriented in space is going to be something like that on our isometric. So that's what we can expect this thing to look like at the end. So let's get started on that. I'm going to say this is a diameter of 2 inches. 1, 2, so that's pretty big. 1.5, let's say 1.5. Okay, so 1.5 by 1.5 gives me this as my face. And then we're going to go back, let's say a 1/2 inch. 1/2 inch back. Okay, so let me start with the outer circle, and then I'll work on the inner one. So 1.5 inches would mean that my circle is going to need to become an oval. It's going to touch down something like this. Oops, excuse me. Stretched a little bit. There we go. All right. Same thing is going to happen on this back surface, gang. So I am going to need to actually sketch back here that same oval. So let me see if I can do that. I'm going to take a slight shortcut because I actually know that only a smidgen of that's going to show up, right? Only this part of it is going to show up. Part that is going to run tangent. Okay. So far so good. Now I have this interior hole to worry about. And that is going to be a 1/2 inch diameter, size of a dime. Okay, and don't forget that actually this is going to happen too on the back face. So on the back face, back here, we're going to have another hole that's going to be the size of a dime back here. You have to check that because sometimes what winds up happening is that you'll see a little sliver of that hole pop through, right? You'll see a little bit of that hole. On this example, you don't, because actually what winds up happening is your thickness is a 1/2 inch and the hole diameter is a 1/2 inch. So these guys don't wind up crossing. So you're going to just see this here. But sometimes, depending on the thickness, if this were half as thick, if this were only a 1/4 inch thick, you would definitely see that sliver of a hole on the back surface. Okay, let me go over this with marker. Oops, that's a little bit messy over there. Okay. A little bit of an oops on that edge, but I'm not going to worry too much about that. The shading I'm going to do, gang, is going to kind of go like this. You can do rounded shading if you want. This is fairly clear what it is. Actually, if there's shading there, there's got to be shading in the hole too. Okay. Okay, and it's red, so why not? All right, so that's that guy. Let's do one more piece. Let's actually do this guy. So fresh piece of paper, folks. One more isometric sketch. All right, there's your scale. We'd already decided from prior practice session that this would be our front view. So that means it's going to come up looking kind of like this. Work on this. I'm going to say it is 2 inches long. 2, 3 inches long. 3 inches long. And an inch tall. Inch tall. About a quarter tall. And it's going to be a 1/4 inch thick. So I'll come back for a 1/4 inch thickness. Now let's work on those holes. So I've got dime-sized holes. So if I put the center there, this, and this. Oops. Kind of in between grid lines, guys, but that makes it look correct with its spacing. Okay. Now, you are going to have this hole visible through the backside. So one trick would be to say, okay, I know my offset here, my thickness is going to be 1/2 inch, and I'm going to replicate, I'm going to copy this arc. I'm sorry, a 1/4 inch back to give me that back surface. All right, the last thing is those rounded edges, okay? So they're kind of easy on a few of these, but then they get a little trickier. So what winds up happening with these edges is they're going to be ovals. It's a circular feature, right? So it's going to be similar profile to what we've done before with the when we do our cylinders, right? You're going to wind up cutting, and they're going to look different whether you're on the right side or on the left side. Okay, let me go over this in marker. I'll erase all my sketch lines. A little bit of the oops there. Okay. All right, shading, your guess, guys, is as good as mine. I might do some, again, cross-hatching here through the thickness, or a little bit of texturing. That's about it. Okay, that's isometric sketching.